Well, hey guys, we are coming up quickly on the interviews with the communication students, and I wanted to record a video that walked you through the process of how to get ready for the interview, how to conduct the interview, and probably more important to you, how I'm going to go about grading the interview. So let me get started with a PowerPoint share. This is out on the content section of the website, of our class website in GoView, and there should be a quick link to this PowerPoint like all the other ones that we've had this semester in the announcement on the home page. So let me share my screen and let's get started. The interview project, overview and grading. There's a lot of slides here. It'll take a little bit of time to talk through this, but I know that you want details, transparency on the purpose of this thing, the objectives of this thing, the expectations of this thing, and the grading of this thing. So first of all, let's talk about the project before we get into the grading part of it. Things that you need to remember is that you are doing these on a video channel, and it's important that you be there before your guest is. So if your appointment is at 10 o'clock, you might want to consider logging in about 9:45. Some of these folks are ready for this, they're anxious for this, and they're going to be coming in early. And it sets a bad tone to start with if they get there and you're not. So be early, at least 5 minutes before the candidate. And because you don't know if the candidate's going to be on time, a little bit late, or a little bit early, it's probably best to go in, open up the Teams call or the Zoom call or however you're doing it about 15 minutes early. And then you can shut off your video and you can shut off your sound and you can just listen for them to come into the room. Then you can go in and share your camera and share your audio and get started. Have a strategy for the interview. Be familiar with your questions. You're certainly going to need to look at your matrix to get a refresher on what the question is. But if you kind of have an idea in your head based upon the lecture that we talked about, interview one or something, where it talked about basically how to fill out your time. If you have an idea and a strategy, okay, I'm going to kind of set the tone in the first couple of minutes, talk about the job description and the department and things like that, and then transition into my questions and spend maybe 30 minutes on some good questions and answers, and then have a little bit of time to kind of follow up, next steps, what questions do you have for me, that sort of thing. The strategy will help keep you focused on where you need to go from wherever you are right now. And then try to keep your interviews pretty much the same. I can speak from experience that as you do interviews, things will come to mind that didn't happen in the last interview. The third interview, you'll find a better way to phrase a question. But you got to make sure that the fourth and the fifth and maybe even the sixth interviews look just like the first and the second ones. Otherwise, we don't have procedural fairness. We've talked about that in one of our lessons. If you make up a new question, you cannot ask it to the last people if you did not ask it to the first people. So even if the wording is very poor, ask the same questions in the same way to everybody and make sure that the interviews are pretty much the same. So be early is the first tip. Second tip is be professional. Don't be casual. Don't be business casual. You want to look nice, and you want to make sure that your clothing is nice, that your grooming is nice. To be sexist, ladies, you're going to want to make sure that you have on whatever normal makeup and lipstick and all that kind of stuff that you would normally wear if you're going out to an important meeting or a wedding or something like that. Guys, you probably want to consider maybe putting on a tie, putting on a jacket. At the very least, you want to look professional. And I say not business casual, but that's better than nothing. I had a situation a number of years ago with some ladies who were in this as an on-campus class. And when they met one of their candidates for the interview, they were doing it in the conference room here in the School of Business. And they were wearing T-shirts. And as much as we had encouraged them to dress professionally, they kind of did it the way they wanted to do it. And they might have not had a problem with it at all, but they couldn't get some of the video capability, technology capability to work around campus. And as I said, they ended up coming to the School of Business and using our conference room. And the dean walked by as they were doing it. And I'm telling you what, she lit into me because they were not professional. You want to make sure you set a really, really good image, first impression for the candidates. Even though this is a pretend interview and it's a pretend job with a pretend company, act like it's real. Look professional. Whether they look professional or not might figure into your scoring of them and how they're going to be evaluated on hire or not hire, but you want to make sure that you do look professional. Okay, so be early, be professional, be respectful, be very friendly, be very warm. Although in the real world, they would be looking for a job. In this case, in our practice interviews, they're really doing you a favor. So be gracious, be appreciative, thank them for taking an interest, thank them for choosing your job to interview for, thank them for sending your resume early, assuming that they did, so that you could look over it and get prepared. Thank them for showing up for the interview, thank them for their time when you're done. It'll go an awful long way. A part of the grading for this is their perspective on how nice you were. So if you're friendly and warm and gracious, you ought to get good points for that. So be early, be professional, be respectful, and be complete. And I'd like to see your interviews be 40 minutes. The grading scale is going to be that if they're at least 30, you're going to get full points on them. But in the real world, if your interview is not 30 or 40 minutes at least, and maybe pushing towards an hour, the interviewer has made a decision early on, probably, that you're not right. If you're the right candidate, either they know it immediately and you might have a short interview because they don't have to learn much, or they're going to spend a while getting to know you and verifying if their first impressions were correct. So 40 minutes is the target. Whether you hit it or not is going to potentially impact your points that you get, but think towards 40 minutes. And we tried, as we were doing the questions, to make sure that you had them phrased correctly and enough of them that are story type questions to where 40 minutes, if you spend a little bit identifying the job and the responsibilities and talking a little bit about the company, 40 minutes shouldn't be out of the question. Your first ones may be 20 because you're nervous and you're not accustomed perhaps to this. But you ought to see, the longer you do them, the more you do of them, that they get longer and longer because you begin to get a feel for what you're looking for. Know what you're looking for before you go in to make sure that you get it. Once the call is over, you can't go back and ask another question. If you've got questions that say, give me an example of when, be listening to make sure they do give you an example. And if they don't, it's okay to have a follow-up on that same topic to get the information that you need. You don't ever want to come up with a brand new question. But if your question is, tell me about a time when you had to take a leadership role, and they talk about being in a team, you can say, okay, that sounds great, but what leadership role did you play? Or if that's not when you played a leadership role, give me a time when you did. So look for examples of the things that you're trying to measure and get everything you possibly need to make a decision. It's very important to develop your questions to get you all the information you need and to create your matrix so that you can score whether they gave you the information that you need. Be early, be professional, be respectful, be complete, and be consistent. For procedural fairness, you need to have the same questions for everybody, and you need to have the same evaluation standards and scoring mechanism, i.e. matrix, for everybody. That makes sure that everybody has the exact same opportunity as everybody else, and nobody can complain or challenge that you showed favorites in the process. So now the grading for this, it's 100 points for the assignment. Input that the candidates as a group give on you or about you is 54% of the grade, a little over half. The input that you give me about them is 20%. Technical kinds of things are 20%, and then I've got 6% that I can play with. It's contingency, it's very subjective rather than objective, and I get the candidate input by sending them a survey after it's over. If you've ever taken the communications class and had this done before, you've been the one being interviewed, you remember what the survey looks like, and we'll talk through that here in just a minute. But a total of 100 points. You have a lot of control over about 40 of it. If you've done everything I've asked you to do so far, 46% ought to go pretty well, and then it's just a matter of making sure that the 54% from the candidates is done in such a, is the things you do in the interview are done in such a way that they give you really good scores. So let's look into the individual pieces of this grading and see where these numbers come from. First of all, the candidate input, they're going to give me feedback on you. The first thing they're going to give me feedback on is whether you looked professional, and that's worth 5 points. They're either going to agree or disagree, strongly agree, strongly disagree that you are professional in your appearance. And that means that, ladies, if you're wearing the business suit or the dress and the pearls and all that kind of stuff, guys, if you're very professional looking, very nice business casual, or maybe even a coat and tie, they're probably going to strongly agree that you looked professional. And that's worth 5 points or 4 points or 3 points. If they disagree, if you wear a t-shirt, you're not going to get any points for that. And 0 out of 5 almost moves you down into the B range immediately. So make sure every time that you do an interview, you look professionally. Second thing we're going to look at is how you handled the interview. If you're professional, they'll probably give you 5. Again, strongly disagree to strongly agree. There really shouldn't be any reasons why they strongly or somewhat disagree. Even if you're nervous, if you seem to be handling the thing, the pace goes well, the questions make sense, you take the time to listen to their answers, but how do you handle the interview? Worth up to 5 points. Next thing is how well you communicate. And we've tried to stress that you need to be communicating with them more than just once. First of all, you've hopefully thanked them for showing an interest and sending their resume. You have communicated how and when we're going to do this thing, maybe periodically through the way that you've said, hey, listen, we got 3 more days. I want to make sure that there's not anything you need. Hey, don't forget, tomorrow, such and such. Hey, later, looking forward to meeting with you later tonight. The more you communicate with them, the more they're going to say, yeah, he or she exceeded my expectations on the communication process. The last thing we want to hear related to communications is that I made an appointment and it was confirmed through an email and I never heard another word, and I just hoped that when I showed up on Thursday at 10 that they were there waiting for me. Make sure that you communicate really, really well throughout the process. It's not too late as you start to look at this video if you've already made appointments and gotten resumes and things. All right, next. Did you treat them with respect? Notice that everything so far has been up to 5 points. This is 10 points because this is really, really key. You call them Mr. and Ms. Thank them a lot. Consider that they're doing you a big favor by interviewing for your position. If they feel like you have treated them with respect, you could get 10 points on this thing. If they disagree, if you seem rude, if you seem distracted, if you seem like this is an inconvenience, make sure if you've had a bad day that you put on that happy face and that smiley face and you act like it's been a good day, because this alone can knock you out of an A for the project. All right, then they're going to give me input about the process itself, and this is up to 29 points. So were the questions that you asked related to the job? Based on what they read in the job description. Now, they're not going to remember a lot of the job description, but if they know they're interviewing for a warehouse clerk and the questions you ask are about a warehouse, they're going to say, yeah, those questions related to the job description, though I can't remember the details of it. Everything that I remember this person asking related to success as a warehouse person. So make sure that all of the questions, when I gave you feedback, you used that feedback to really focus this on the KSAOs and the essential functions. 10 points. Ask a lot of questions that have nothing to do with the job, and your overall score is going to go down. All right, second thing is that you took enough time to adequately assess their qualifications. Now, if your interview lasts 15 minutes, they're probably going to give you a 3, maybe a 2 or a 1. So make sure that you've sent the signal to them that you're really interested in them for this job and that you've done everything you possibly can to see if they're qualified or not. So accurately, adequately, intensively assess their qualifications. 5 points. Next, was the process fair? They either strongly agree or they strongly disagree or somewhat or whatever. If they don't agree that the process is fair, there's a follow-up question for them to give me some examples of what you might have done or not done that made them think that it wasn't fair. So this one has a follow-up where most of the others don't. I want to know why, if it wasn't a fair process. And almost everybody is going to get a 4 or a 5 on this. And if you get a 4, it's probably not because the process wasn't fair, but because they're one of the harsher graders, and it's hard to get a 5. So don't be too upset if you get a 4 instead of a 5. But if you treat them well, If the questions relate to the job description, you're probably going to get good scores on this as well. So were there any questions that they thought were illegal or unethical? So the questions asked in the context of the positive, assuming the positive. Were the questions legal? Were the questions ethical? Up to 5 points. Yeah, I think they were all legal. I think they were all ethical. They didn't ask me anything that made me wonder. If they say that they thought some questions were unethical or illegal, I'm going to ask them for clarification on what the questions were, so we can follow up on that and make sure that you learn something. Don't ask this question in the future. So 5 points on that. And then, assuming that this had been real, would you have accepted a job offer? Probably yes, definitely yes. The question is going to be couched in the context that I know that you have a real job, but if you didn't, if you were really looking for a job, did this person impress you so much that you would take a job with this company, yes or no? So it's 4 points or 2 points or no points. All right, so I think that gets everything is from their perspective, 54% of the overall grade. You can get up to, the bottom line there is a typo from a previous semester, you can get up to 20 points for what you give me about them. I've got to give feedback to their teacher. And what I ask you to do at the end of the interview, as you're looking over your matrix and your scoring, I want you to, right after the interview, jot down 2 things you thought they did really well. Maybe their resume was amazing. Maybe they looked really well. Give me some specifics on those things. Don't just say, great resume, but tell me a little bit why. Maybe there was a particular question that you thought they just really answered well, or maybe it was their poise or their smile or something, but 2 positive qualities that I can go back to their teacher with to say, here's a couple of places where they should take pride in themselves, that they did really, really well. Make sure they continue to do this in their interviews in the future. And then 2 negative qualities. And it might be that they weren't as professionally dressed as you thought they should have been, or that they were late, or it took you till the last minute to get their resume. Anything that you think that you could shed some light on that would help them in future resumes. You get 1 point for each of 2 positive qualities and 1 point for each of 2 negative qualities. And then your overall impressions about each one of them. If you use complete sentences, you get a point overall. So you can get up to, I got to rethink this real quick in my head. You're going to do 5 or 6 interviews. If you're doing 6, one of them is kind of a bonus that maybe replaces the worst grade of the other 5. You're going to do at least 5 interviews, and these will be worth 4 points apiece. So probably as I look at this slide, I should have corrected this before I recorded. We'll forget about the complete sentences. It'll kind of factor into the other one. So I'm looking for 2 positive qualities at a point each and 2 negative qualities about a point each. If you don't give me anything, you lose a point or 2. If it's not a complete thought or you don't describe what you're talking about, it's probably worth the loss of a point. So 20 points about them, mostly in terms of the feedback you give, positive and negative. Technical input, the interview length is worth 20 points. And I'm going to ask them, how long do you think it lasted? So maybe to help them understand how long it did last, at the beginning you say, hey, it's 10 o'clock, let's get started. And at the end, maybe glance at your watch and say, look at that, it's 10:40. We've spent 40 minutes. It went by real fast. If you can plant the seed that this was 30 or 40 or whatever minutes, then they're more likely to remember and score you well here. If you get 30 or more, for every interview that you get 30 or more minutes worth of credit in their mind. They may be wrong, but it is what it is. 4 points. And then as you start having shorter and shorter interviews, you lose a point based on the time. I'm really looking for 30 or more and preferably 40 or more. It's only productive time. So if you just kind of ask a bunch of, how'd you like the football game last week or whatever, I won't know you did it, but I want them to be honest in their assessment of you. If you had a 40-minute interview, but it felt like to them you were just kind of killing time, I'm going to ask them to assess that and factor that in. All right, my input, 6 points. I'm going to think back over the semester, and I'm going to think about your attitude. If you pushed back on something, if you were late consistently with something, if I had to follow up with you, it's like I still don't have this or I still don't have that. then I'm going to count off here. And this is half a letter grade, a little bit over half a letter grade. So hopefully you've turned everything in on time. I haven't had to remind you or bug you or anything like that. If I've had to do that, whatever the reason, expect to have a loss of some points on this part of the overall scoring. So that is getting close to the end of it. After I've gotten all of this, I've got the numbers I need to fill out your evaluation on this, to give you feedback on this, but I'm going to ask a few other things just for information purposes. Each question, questionnaire, they're going to be asked, what's one thing that you did well? And they're going to be asked to say they were really very polite, or they were really very well dressed, or whatever. And this doesn't factor into your grade, but I'm going to give you that feedback so that you know how to prepare for the real ones when they come up in the next few years. And I'm also going to say what's one thing they could do better. I've asked you to give me 2 positives and two negatives on them. I'm asking them to give me 1 positive and 1 negative. And what general feedback would you give? Again, this doesn't affect your grade. The grade is already impacted through other things related to this, but a very specific, you did well and you could do better. And general feedback. When I give you your grade, I'll give you a picture of the spreadsheet with all of the averages of these things that add up to a total. And then below that, I'll give you word for word what they put on this did well, could do better, and general feedback. I also want to get information and feedback for me and for the business communications teachers. So I'm going to ask them what feedback would they give to their communications teacher in terms of how well they were prepared, and what feedback would they give me in terms of how well they think you are prepared. And the teachers, including me, take this feedback and really use it to get better in this process. All right, so what do I do after the interview is over? You will be asked to email me and say, last night I had my interview with Susie, and I'll mark that off my sheet. And at the end of each day, or every morning, I'll look at what was reported as having been completed yesterday. I'll mark that off my list, and I'll send those students a link to a Google Form survey where they'll go in and they'll say, my interview was with Susie. And then they'll go through and they'll answer all these questions we've just talked about, and they'll submit it. And then I'll be able to pull an Excel file that has all that information, and I will convert all of the strongly agrees to 5. And when we get 5 responses on you, we'll have completed our chart. If you have 6 responses, I'll try to factor that in to somehow to make sure that we get an average. And if you get, if a question is worth 5 points and your answers average out to a 3.8, you'll get 3.8 out of 5 out of that particular item. And we'll just add those things up and we'll calculate the final total on that. Hopefully that answers all of the questions you have. There's a very, very logical, mathematical, analytical way that we're going to come up with the grade for these things. It is almost over half anyway, dictated by their impressions of how well you did. So if you're nice, if you're polite, if your questions revolve around the job description, you ought to do pretty well. It doesn't matter what feedback you give them. It can be really harsh. It can be very, very light. As long as you give me 2 positives and 2 negatives, you'll do well in that section. If you've done pretty well at communicating with me throughout the process, you've been on time with things, you'll get those, most or all of those 6 points there. And it shouldn't be real difficult. Occasionally I have somebody that get a C because they just do a lousy job interviewing or they act like they don't care. But B's and A's are really, really common. I get a pretty good number of A's from the other students who said, you did a really good job. It was obvious you were a little nervous, and I knew that you had not done this before, but you did really well. So don't be too nervous. Just do the very best you can and treat them with respect. And I think that you'll find that the outcomes are really good. If you have questions, put it in the Ask Dr. Grimes discussion board. Otherwise, keep this in mind as you go forward into the interviews. Do the very best you can on the first one. Understand it probably won't be great unless you already interview a lot. And this is going to be a little different from the way that you interview normally. Anyway, it's designed to be a little different because I think there's a lot of best practices built into this project that aren't necessarily used in the real world. But if the first one doesn't go well, that's fine. They're probably still going to give you pretty good grades because they know you're trying and this is your first try and they're nervous too. But you should see improvement as you go. And over the course of 5 or 6 interviews, the averages ought to take care of themselves to where you probably get a pretty good grade on this. And this is a big part of your overall grade. So once this is done, you can rest a little bit. The heavy lifting is over for the class, and it's just a matter of learning a few materials and applying them a little bit and cruising through the end of the semester and going into your next interview for an HR job or a management job saying, you know what, I know how to interview. I know all the best practices. I've done it once with the nursing students and 5 or 6 times with business students. So I can walk into this job as a manager with 6 or 7 good interviewing experiences to guide me through this in real life. And your managers, your bosses, the companies you work for are going to think that you are amazing because people don't do this well, and you will. Hopefully that is encouraging. That answers a lot of questions. I'll be back later with some more videos for the chapters that we're going to cover in the future. But hope you're having a good semester so far. You're looking forward to this, and you're looking to improve on your first experiences to where at the end you think that you really got the hang of this. That's it for now. Bye.